Welcome to my YouTube channel. This space was created to bring people together so we can share our struggles, talk about life, or simply chat about how your day went. Feel free to leave a comment and share your story with everyone. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's dive into today's story. Welcome. Tonight, we're going far back to a world shaped by rivers and rituals, by sun-baked bricks and silent stars. A world older than empires and deeper than memory. You are about to drift through the winding alleyways and courtyard homes of ancient Babylon, the mythic Babylon of towering ziggurats and fiery prophets, but the quieter one, where life unfolded grain by grain, sunrise by sunrise, under the gaze of watchful gods. This isn't the story of kings or conquests, not yet. It's the slower story. The one lived by people who tilled the soil, hauled the water, etched their prayers into clay, and navigated a city that could bless or break them with equal ease. Let yourself settle, okay? Breathe, slow and easy, and imagine yourself here on the flat banks of the Euphrates. The air is thick with dust and distant voices. Somewhere a goat bleats, somewhere a temple bell rings, low and mellow. The day begins again, and so does your shift. Let's begin. What it was like to live just one ordinary day in this extraordinary city. Imagine yourself waking up in Babylon. The year doesn't matter. It could be 1750 BCE or 1600 or later. The sun rises the same, harsh and gold, over flat roofs and the rising mist of river water evaporating from cisterns. You sleep on a reed mat. You share your room with 3 others, your brother, your cousin, and the neighbor's youngest son, who traded shelter for help with errands. The room is low-ceilinged, the air close, and the scent of warm clay walls is something you barely notice anymore. It clings to you, just like the dust that gets into your nose, your eyes, your sleep. There's no alarm, only the shuffling sounds of people stirring in the street, sandaled feet, and the faint creak of a donkey cart. Time to go. You're a laborer, not enslaved, but not far from it either. You're tied to a brickworks crew. There are no weekends, no privacy. The brick dust burnt into your fingernails, packed into the folds of your elbows, will never fully come off. The work is monotonous. You and your team fetch clay from a pit near the riverbank, mixing it with straw under the watchful eye of an overseer. Then come the molds, pressed with bare hands, and a long wait as the bricks dry under the heat. The worst part? Hauling the finished ones, heavy, still warm, each one awkward to carry, stack after stack, carried to a merchant's construction yard or, worse, to the temple. The temples pay well, but the priests are particular. Too much sand in the mix, and your pay is docked. Too slow, and your name is noted, not out loud, just etched onto a fresh clay token by a silent scribe, sitting in the shade. Lunch is a handful of dates. Maybe flatbread if your sister traded well this week. Water is drawn from a shared jug, cloudy with silt. You take your turn, sip, wipe your mouth on your sleeve. Back to work. The afternoon heat is sharp and dry. The walls of Babylon are baked under it. The whitewashed alleys glow like bone. You long for shade. You don't get it. You're lucky. The day ends without a beating. One worker didn't show today's whispers say he collapsed last week while delivering bricks to the northern gate. No one speaks his name. Stead remains. His tools were already taken. You walk home slowly. Your back aches. Your hands are raw. Your hair is stiff with dust and sweat. You pass scribes, merchants, a brewer who is closing up his stall. The smell of barley mash fills the air sore, sticky, almost sweet. You don't stop. You don't have the money. At home, your family eats together, quietly. Your mother burns dried herbs in the hearth to keep mosquitoes away. The smell reminds you of every other night, every other year. You sleep again on the mat. Tomorrow is the same. In the brick dust, it never leaves your skin. a softly unfolding biography of King Hammurabi and the enduring logic of his laws. The city is quiet now. The sun has set. Amid small bowls of oil flickering gently behind reed screens. The alleys echo with the soft padding of cats, the distant murmur of prayer, and the hollow clang of a temple bell marking the passage of night. Let your mind drift away from the streets, away from the dust, and back in time, back to a man who shaped not just Babylon, but the very way people understood order, power, and justice. His name was Hammurabi, and his legacy has outlived the sun-baked bricks of his empire. He was not the first king of Babylon, but he was the first to make it matter. Hammurabi came to the throne around 1792 BCE, inheriting a modest city-state among many. Babylon, at the time, was just one grain of power in a Mesopotamian field full of rival kingdoms, Larsa, Shnana, Mari, small domains held together by alliances, kinship, and the occasional sword. He ruled for over 40 years, and in that span, he did what few rulers managed. He expanded, quietly, diplomatically, until suddenly, Babylon was the center of everything. But what he is most remembered for is not war. It is law. You've likely heard of the Code of Hammurabi, tall basalt stele, carved with hundreds of lines of cuneiform. If you saw it, you might recognize the image at the top. The king standing before Shamash, the god of justice, receiving a rod and a ring, the symbols of divine authority. But the laws themselves, they weren't meant to be read by the people. Most couldn't read. The stele was a monument, a message, a reassurance that order existed, that justice had a source, that you knew your place. The laws themselves are many, nearly 300 rules covering everything from theft in marriage to wages and livestock. A builder constructs a house and it collapses, killing the owner's son. Then the builder's own son must die. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But it wasn't just harshness, it was structured. Before Hammurabi, justice was personal. You wronged a man, he wronged you back. The gods were appealed to. Blood answered blood. Hammurabi offered something different. A state standing between you and your neighbor. An invisible thread of law pulling everyone in line. He applied these rules widely. He traveled his empire, acting as judge in person. He heard disputes between nobles and farmers, priests and laborers. His rulings were written down, archived in clay, stored in temples. Over time, people believed justice came not from vengeance, but from process. He was also a careful propagandist. Code begins and ends, not with the rules, but with poetry-lengthy praises of Hammurabi's wisdom, humility, and divine favor. He calls himself the shepherd, the protector, the bringer of plenty, and over time, the myth held. Hammurabi died old by the standards of kings. His sons inherited an empire, but not his balance. Babylon declined, rose again under later dynasties, but Hammurabi's name never left. Today, the basalt stele stands in the Louvre Museum in Paris. Tourists pass it every hour, barely noticing the tightly packed script. But look closely, and you see a world governed by measure, a world that sought to tame chaos with clauses, a world where justice wasn't equal, but it was predictable. You can almost hear the quiet scratch of a scribe's stylus, the low murmur of a king issuing his decree, and beneath it all, the heavy hush of obedience. A slow, immersive biography of King Hammurabi and the quiet permanence of his law. The sun has set over Babylon. You lie still on your reed mat, the scent of warm clay walls clinging faintly in the cooling air. Outside, the city exhales. A few oil lamps flicker. The donkeys are quiet, and the bells from the temple have fallen silent. Now, we shift our focus from the dust of labor to the ink of legacy. Let yourself drift backward through centuries of rulers, rituals, and silent scribes. Back to a man who ruled not through force alone, but through something far more enduring. the careful crafting of order. His name was Hammurabi, a king in the middle of the world. The year is around 1792. BCE Babylon at this time is not yet the jewel it will become. It is a modest city, important, yes, but still overshadowed by others. Larsa, Ishnana, Mari, cities ruled by strong men and old dynasties. But then Hammurabi takes the throne. He inherits a city, not an empire. He is young, ambitious, patient, and unlike many of his contemporaries, he does not begin with war. He begins with water. You see, the rivers, the Tigris, and the Euphrates are both life and threat. When they flood, they bring nourishment. When they rise too fast, they destroy. Hammurabi understands this. His early rule is marked not by conquest, but by canals, by careful irrigation, by the promise of stability. Imagine walking the embankments he orders rebuilt. The fresh-cut reeds tied with rope, the canal beds lined with stone, the scent of damp earth and sun-warmed water. Not grand gestures, but vital ones. And the people notice. The gathering of power, but Hammurabi is not simply a caretaker. He watches. He waits. For decades, he strengthens Babylon's position, not through open battle, but through negotiation. He signs treaties, forges pacts, offers marriages. And then, when the moment is right, he strikes. In the final years of his reign, Hammurabi defeats rival kings, absorbs neighboring cities, and suddenly, almost without warning, Babylon is at the center of a vast and varied territory. He governs not just a city now, but an entire region stretching across Mesopotamia. A patchwork of peoples, customs, dialects, and gods. How do you rule such a thing? With a sword? Yes, at times. But Hammurabi chooses something more subtle, something permanent. He chooses law. The stele he pictured now. A tall pillar of black basalt, smooth, unyielding, carved with hundreds of tiny, wedge-shaped letters cuneiform, the writing of scribes. The pillar stands in a public space, not to be read by common folk who cannot read, but to be seen, to be known. At the top is an image. Hammurabi stands before the god Shamash, the sun god, the god of justice. The god hands the king a rod and a ring, symbols of rule and judgment. It is no accident. This is not Hammurabi's law, he is saying. It is divine. The stele contains 282 laws. They are detailed, precise, and at times deeply harsh. If a man steals, his hand shall be cut off. A builder constructs a house, and it collapses, killing the owner's son. The builder's son must die. These are laws that reflect a different world. A world where accountability is direct, where justice is measured not by fairness, but by balance. We look closer, and the laws also speak of fairness. They regulate wages. They protect widows and orphans. They outline contracts for trade, for labor, for farming. And above all, they do something rare in ancient times. They apply to many, not just nobles, not just priests, but laborers, sailors, merchants, farmers. The rhythm of the court's Hammurabi doesn't just write laws. He lives them. He travels through his kingdom, hearing cases, issuing rulings, consulting with temple judges. His scribes record disputes and resolutions. Clay tablets are filled with contracts, adoptions, inheritance claims. Picture a Babylonian courtroom, a shaded temple chamber, a long, low bench for the judges, clay tablets set before them. The air smells of burned incense and wax. A merchant stands to one side, a farmer to the other. I dispute over a damaged shipment of grain. The judge speaks slowly. The scribe writes carefully, each stroke precise. The judgment is issued, not with a flourish, but with a stamp. The seal is pressed into clay. It is done. Order, not chaos. Structure, not vengeance. This is Hammurabi's true gift. The king as shepherd Hammurabi refers to himself in his inscriptions with a peculiar image. I am the shepherd, not the conqueror, not the warrior, but the shepherd. It is a role of quiet power, of watching, tending, correcting. He speaks of protecting the weak, of maintaining harmony, of ensuring the gods are pleased. He doesn't separate law from religion, okay? For him and for his people, they are woven together, sacred braid of duty, fear, and belief. And in the long evenings, perhaps he stood atop the palace, looking out across the rooftops of Babylon, listening to the night, the river, the prayers, the distant hammer of a brickmaker, finishing one last task. Legacy. When Hammurabi does after more than 4 decades on the throne, he leaves behind more than canals or buildings. He leaves behind a way of thinking. Other kings imitate his style. Their cities adopt his laws. And though the stele itself is eventually buried beneath rubble, it is discovered again thousands of years later in the ruins of a distant city called Susa, where it had been taken as a spoil of war. It now stands in the Louvre Museum in Paris, quiet, unmoving, still carved with every line. Tourists pass by it every hour. Some stop, some do not, but the laws remain. A whisper from a distant king, a shadow of justice etched in stone, and a reminder that order, even the harsh kind, can outlast empires. A quiet exploration of Babylon's greatest mystery, the ziggurat of Etemenanki. And the enduring myths it inspired. The sky over Babylon was immense. When the winds died down and the fires dimmed, you could see stars like ancient pinpricks in an endless velvet dome. And there, silhouetted against that sky, if you looked from just the right place, you might have seen the outline of a tower, rising step by step, brick by baked brick, as if daring to scrape the heavens. This was Etemenanki, the ziggurat at the heart of Babylon, and in time, the inspiration for something even more enduring, the Tower of Babel. Let your mind drift upward now, through time and smoke and sand. Etemenanki was no myth. Its name in Sumerian meant the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. It was not built in a day or even in a decade. It was a layered structure, a ziggurat, made of 7 stacked terraces, each one slightly smaller than the one below. Together, they rose skyward, perhaps as high as 90 meters, though the truth is shrouded in time. The base was immense, over 300 feet on each side, and the core was made of sun-dried bricks, the facing of baked ones bound with pumen, that dark, sticky mortar that smells faintly of oil and heat. But the mystery is what it truly looked like. You see, almost nothing of it remains. Later rulers, like Nebuchadnezzar II, claimed to have completed or restored it. T described it as a monument to the gods, especially Marduk, Babylon's chief deity. In inscriptions, he spoke of its gateways, plated in gleaming bronze, and of ascending to the summit of heaven. But inscriptions are not photographs. They flatter, they exaggerate. Archaeologists who have searched the old city, especially during 19th and early 20th century digs, have found outlines, foundations, fragments, enough to confirm its existence, but not enough to restore its full shape. The baked bricks were long ago quarried and reused. The sun-dried ones crumbled. What's left is a ghost footprint. So what happened to it? Babylon fell, as all cities do, first to Persia, then to time, and centuries later, when exiles and travelers and scribes from faraway lands passed through the ruins. They stared at the great mounds, the broken walls, and they wondered. They told stories of a tower that once sought to reach the gods, of a time when all humans spoke one tongue and worked together, till the divine punished their pride by scattering their language like wind-blown ash. That story is the Tower of Babel, a tale found in the Hebrew Bible and echoed in Islamic and Christian traditions. It is almost certainly based, in part, on what they saw or imagined in Babylon, but Etemenanki itself. It was never meant to challenge the gods. It was a meeting place, a ladder between earth and sky. At its summit, priests performed quiet rituals, burnt incense, offered grain, consulted omens in the stars. So perhaps once a year, a statue of Marduk was carried up its long, spiraling ramp. Imagine that climb, the sound of footsteps on baked clay, the dry wind swirling dust from the lower tiers, the faint scent of cedar wood and perfumed oil, the chant of hymns rising slowly through the open air. It would not have been a place for the common person. You might have seen it from a distance, its shadow stretching across the city, but to touch its stone, to mount its steps, that was the domain of the initiated, the sacred, the few. Even today, the tower's story lingers in myths and art, in the puzzled eyes of archaeologists standing over weathered clay and asking, did it really reach that high? The answer is soft and fading, like the bricks themselves. A slow, atmospheric reflection on Babylon's legendary ziggurat, its lost grandeur, and the stories it left behind. The night deepens. The oil lamps burn lower now, casting soft, golden circles on the floor. Outside, the streets of Babylon lie still, quiet as parchment, silent as the libraries of the gods. Now, let your mind drift upward, up past the reed-roofed homes, past the temple courtyards, up beyond even the highest walls and palaces, toward a shadow that once rose in the heart of this city, a layered mountain of brick and stone, a stairway for prayers, a monument to ambition. The Babylonians called it Etamenica, the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. To later peoples, it would become something more. A myth, a warning, a tower that dared to touch the sky. A monument of layers. Etamanaki was not a temple in the way we think of temples now. It was a ziggurat, a step tower, built in ascending platforms, massive in scale, geometric in precision. It's crowned, it was believed, with a small shrine where heaven and earth might meet. Estimates vary. Some scholars believe the tower may have reached 90 meters in height, nearly 300 feet. Others suggest a bit less, but even the most cautious reckonings place it among the tallest human-made structures of the ancient world. It was built, rebuilt, and expanded over centuries, a collaborative work of kings and workers, of scribes, masons, laborers, and priests. The base, a perfect square each side, nearly 300 feet. The core, sun-dried bricks, mass-produced, stamped with royal inscriptions. The outer shell, fired bricks, sealed with bitumen, that dark, tar-like mortar drawn from the earth itself. It smelled like heat and age and permanence. This process of building. Let's pause here. Close your eyes. Imagine the building process itself, not as an event, but as a rhythm. A slow, persistent act across generations. Thousands of bricks hauled by hand and cart. Ramps spiraling upward so that materials could be carried to the higher levels. The endless crack of rope, the groan of carts, the scrape of stone on stone. Some days, a team of workers might lay just a single line of bricks. Other days, weather would halt everything, forcing them to cover the exposed layers with cloth and hope the rains didn't come. Overseeing it all were the temple architect scribes with blueprints etched on clay tablets, their fingers blackened with ink and soot. They carried no whips, no swords, just knowledge and authority. To build a ziggurat was not just construction, it was ceremony. Each layer was blessed, each stage of progress offered to the gods. And every time the structure rose higher, the people of Babylon looked up and felt a little closer to the divine. The purpose of the tower, but what was it for? It's not a place of worship in the traditional sense. The shrine at the top, if it existed, was small, meant not for crowds, but for solitude. The priests would ascend on holy days, carrying offerings. Perhaps they brought a statue of Marduk himself, the god of Babylon, of judgment, of water and magic. There, in the tower's small upper room, they would wait, pray, chant, perform rituals not meant to be seen, and the people below. They would look up and see the silhouette of their god's dwelling place, etched against the sun, the stars, the rising moon. It was said to be a bridge between heaven and earth, a place where the divine descended, or perhaps where humans reached upward in longing. The slow collapse, but towers do not last forever. Time is a quiet enemy, okay? By the time Herodotus, the Greek historian, visited Babylon in the 5th century BCE, he wrote of a ziggurat already in partial ruin. Later, invaders stripped it of bricks for their own cities. Wind and rain wore down the sun-dried core. Fires gutted the inner chambers. Eventually, even the memory of its design faded. All that remained were mounds low, irregular hills of clay and rubble, the shape distorted, the steps forgotten, secured, and the early archaeologists came hundreds of years ago. They dug carefully. What they found were foundations. Yes, stations, massive bases, bits of glazed tile, thousands of loose bricks, many stamped with the name Nebuchadnezzar II, a later king who claimed to restore the ziggurat in its glory. But no clear reconstruction could be made. The upper stories were gone. The walls collapsed. And the shrine at the summit of it existed, vanished without a trace. What remained was a mystery. It's a Tower of Babel, but from that mystery came a story. You've likely heard it, the tower built to reach the heavens. Of a people once united in language and purpose, whose pride angered the divine. And so, their tongues were confused, their speech broken, their unity shattered, the tower abandoned. The story appears in the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible, and while its details differ, scholars agree it is deeply inspired by Babylon. Not just the city, not just its tower, but its ambition. Later travelers, Jews in exile, traders, scholars would have seen the ruins of Edamanaki. They would have asked questions, heard legends, and formed stories to make sense of the decay, the silence, the sky-reaching rubble. The myth of Babel is not a condemnation of towers, perhaps, but of forgetting humility, of mistaking height for holiness. Still, the tower lived on, in stories, in paintings, in the quiet awe it left behind. A soft descent into the rarefied world of Babylon's temple elite and their power. Rituals and comforts, the stars are high now. The air has cooled. The streets of Babylon have quieted to a hush, broken only by the sound of sandals brushing dust and the low bark of a restless dog. Most homes are dark, their clay lamps extinguished to save oil. The scent of baked earth and distant river water still lingers in the breeze, but not all is asleep. High above the common streets, behind polished gates and thick plastered walls, the priests of Marduk gather. They live not in palaces, those are for kings, but in temple compounds, great structures sprawling beside the sacred ziggurat, wrapped in corridors, courtyards, and colonnades. And while their lives are shaped by ritual, they are far from austere. Imagine yourself now not as a laborer, but as an acolyte, young, chosen, groomed to enter the ranks of the temple priests. Your duties are many: cleaning, preparing incense, memorizing long liturgies in Sumerian, a language no one speaks anymore, but which the gods still prefer. You rise before dawn, you eat separately from others. You bathe in sacred water and wear linen robes. Your hair is trimmed, it's controlled, but in return, you are respected, perhaps even feared. The temple is not just a place of worship. It is a bank, a granary, a library, and a legal authority. People store their wealth here. Kings consult its scribes, and the chief priest, the Zamme, wield influence equal to any noble. And yes, it's the meals. Tonight's dinner is not lavish in the way modern feasts are, but it is abundant and finely prepared. In a shadowed courtyard, cooled by water trickling from a stone spout, low tables are set. The priests sit cross-legged on woven mats, eating from ceramic bowls. The menu is ritualistic, seasonal: barley porridge, cooked with goat's milk and a hint of honey-roasted lamb, slow-cooked and perfumed with coriander and cumin onions, lentils and figs. paired with flatbread still warm from the temple's clay oven, and always a portion set aside first for the god. Incense drips in lazy ribbons from a copper brazier, frankincense imported at great cost. Its scent is bitter and sweet, cutting through the warmth of cooked meat. There is little casual conversation. The priests do not gossip. They chant, recite. They discuss omens observed in the livers of sacrificed animals or dreams interpreted from the night before. A bird flying in the wrong direction. A cracked pot in a merchant's stall. Nothing is meaningless. Everything has weight. The priests are keepers of that weight. And so, even in luxury, their lives are bound. Their movements recorded. Their opinions whispered behind closed doors. Their garments are clean, their fingers stained faintly with ink and ash. They write on clay tablets, not for entertainment, but for record. Thousands of tablets now lost or buried, preserved in vaults and libraries. Lists of donations, inventories of grain, letters between temples and kings. They are the memory keepers of their world, but not immune from change. As Babylon waxed and waned, the priests remained for a time, but eventually temples were looted. Statues of Marduk were carried away by conquerors. Rituals faded. The ink dried. Still, in these hours of the night, you might imagine them seated beneath a moonlit portico, murmuring hymns to a god of storms and judgment. The oil lamp flickering. The grain wine just warm enough, far above the city, but never quite beyond it. A quiet immersion into the sacred routines, privileged lives, and hushed power of Babylon's priestly elite. The city lies deeper in shadow now. The stars have gathered in clusters overhead, and the river's surface reflects them in flickering pieces. Babylon sleeps, but not all of it. Tonight, we walk not among laborers or merchants. Tonight, we slip softly into the world behind the high plastered walls, past the guarded courtyards, into the sanctum of ritual, privilege, and power, the world of the priests of Marduk. You want to find them in the chaos of the market or among the sweating crowds at the kill. Their feet walk polished tiles. Their words are measured, each one weighed like silver. Their lives are slow, silent, and sacred. It's a temple compound. Let your thoughts wander now to the Isagelita, the vast temple complex dedicated to Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon. The structure sprawls just south of the great ziggurat at Anunnaki, its chambers and courtyards enclosed by thick brick walls, glazed in blue and gold. Inside, a network of shaded corridors, cool chambers, storage rooms, kitchens, offices, archives, and sacred shrines. Everything here has a rhythm. Footsteps echo on stone. Incense wafts in gentle waves from tall bronze braziers. Scrolls are unrolled with practiced care. Ink still faintly smelling of cedar, gum, and oil. The priests do not rush. They are never hurried. They move like time itself, steady, unbothered, deliberate. You are here now as a common visitor, but as a newly appointed acolyte, a quiet observer, entrusted with the minor rituals, learning the rules of a world most never see. Ritual and rank. The priesthood is structured like everything in Babylon, with layers and ladders. At the top, Dazang, the high priest. He oversees the temple's wealth, its land, its scribes, its ceremonies. Beneath him, the mixed mass ritual specialists, healers, diviners. They read stars, interpret omens, and conduct sacrifices. Then, the Zadamo administrators, quiet men with sharp eyes, balancing ledgers thicker than any scroll. And finally, the acolytes, young, obedient, half invisible. You serve, you study, you wait. Priests are not chosen randomly. They come from certain families. They are educated, literate. They speak the older languages: Sumerian for prayer, Akkadian for law. Their voices rise and fall in daily chant, always in unison, never rushed. They are guardians of more than faith. They keep knowledge: astronomy, medicine, mathematics, metallurgy. They oversee loans, property records, temple land transactions. In many ways, they are more powerful than kings. But they rarely wield that power directly. They do not raise swords. They whisper instead. And everyone listens. It's preparing the meal. The meal you are about to witness is no feast of excess, okay? But it is one of ritual, refinement, and quiet abundance. The temple kitchens prepare food, not for celebration, but for balanced offerings to gods, meals for priests, and redistribution to the poor. Tonight's menu is seasonal. Stewed lentils, slow simmered with garlic and coriander barley cakes, crusted with date syrup, pickled cucumbers, tart and fragrant, a lamb roast, rubbed with cumin and thyme, carved carefully small bowls of figs, and thin slices of goat cheese. The food is carried by temple servants, laid on polished stone trays, arranged in perfect symmetry on low tables beneath a cedar canopy. Each portion has been measured, each ingredient recorded, K, and before anyone eats, a portion is set aside on a raised offering table for Marduk. It will not be eaten, okay, but it will be seen. The gods do not dine as we do. They are fed through gesture and smoke. The meal itself, the priests dine cross-legged on woven mats. They speak softly, if at all. No music plays, no laughter bubbles. This is not a party. It is a continuation of ritual. The courtyard is lit with oil lamps. The flame dances, the shadows lean and sway. You hear the murmur of a scribe reciting accounts in the background. A servant pours grain wine into painted clay cups. The wine is thin, spiced with cardamom. One of the elder priests begins a quiet recitation, not a prayer exactly, but a reflection, a telling of a dream scene during last night's planetary alignment. His voice is gravel-soft, like parchment unrolling. Another listens and nods, drawing a pattern in the air with his fingers, a sign of agreement or remembrance. You eat quietly, grateful for the warmth. The food is soft, it's gentle on the tongue. You feel full long before you finish. This is food meant not just for nourishment, but for calm. After the meal, the dishes are cleared by hand. No scraps are left. Even crumbs are swept into a ceramic bowl, later given to animals or buried ritually if left uneaten. After dinner, the priests retire to their cells or libraries, some read by lamplight scrolls of old hymns, astronomical tables, legal texts. Others sit in silence, staring at the flame. The wind rustles the hanging cloths at the courtyard edges. Somewhere, a bronze chime sounds a signal to extinguish the outer lamps, whispered beneath the stars. And as you drift toward rest, think not of grandeur, or wealth, or rule. Think of order, of ritual, of the slow echo of footsteps on stone, of a bowl set gently before a statue, and of a name Marduk's spoken reverently, quietly, again and again. And now the lamps have burned low. The last chant has faded into the walls. The ziggurat, once a ladder to the heavens, rests silent under a cloak of stars. The river moves steadily in the distance, unseen but ever present, just as it was thousands of years ago. You've spent some time in Babylon tonight, Kay, not as a conqueror, not as a king, Kay, but as someone much closer to the heartbeat of history. A tired worker, dust on your skin, a watchful priest measuring the night for omens, a scribe, a builder, a silent witness. Kaya, this was a city of bricks and breath, of laws and rituals, a place where life was measured in handfuls of grain, where justice came inscribed in clay, and where dreams climbed higher than stone. It was not an easy place to live. The heat, the hierarchy, it's the weight of the gods, always pressing down. But Babylon endured through storms and sieges, through myths and misreadings. It left behind not just ruins, but rhythms, the rhythm of labor and rest, of sunrise and record-keeping, okay? Of temple bells and quiet prayers, okay? And as your thoughts drift now gently, slowly know that you've touched something ancient, not just history, but memory. The shared memory of humanity rising from riverbanks, reaching upward with each patient brick, and pausing now and then to breathe. So let yourself drift, too, back to your own soft bed, to the quiet hum of now. And somewhere, beneath a distant layer of sand and sky, the old city sleeps again. Good night, and thank you for listening to Boring History for Sleep.